Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to all the participants, and thank you for being us today. I'm Gianpel Dell'Angelo. I serve as Principal Investigator for the NEWAVE Innovative Training Network. Today is the fourth appointment of the thematic seminar series as part of the NEWAVE Diffused conference. We started at the beginning of April, and we will continue until the end of the year with bi-weekly online webinars. So stay posted. This thematic seminar series features the NEWAVE early stage researchers illustrating findings and insights from their PhD projects on different dimensions of water governance. I am very pleased to introduce Dona Geagea. She's a NEWAVE PhD candidate based at the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam, conducting research with the supervision of Professor Maria Geagea and myself. Before starting her PhD, Dona worked for over a decade as a facilitator and project manager in the water environmental sector, designing and moderating multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder knowledge and innovation collaboration projects. Combining her professional experience with her academic background, she brings feminist and decolonial thinking to her work on water commons. Dona is a Rotary Global Scholar and one of the 10 women selected as an Aura Fellow with the Be the Earth Foundation. Today, I would also like to welcome Professor Maria Geagea, who will frame the research, and then our invited discussants, Lavinia Steinfort and Dr. Maria Francesca De Tullio. They will share the remarks in the case studies. Few words about Professor Geagea, who doesn't really need many introductions. She's a professor in urban, regional, and environmental planning at the University of Amsterdam, Faculty of Social and Behavioral Sciences. Lavinia Steinfort is the coordinator of the Public Alternatives Project at the Transnational Institute, while Dr. Maria Francesca De Tullio is a postdoc researcher in constitutional law at the Federico II University of Naples. She's also an activist in the Urban Commons movement in Naples and co-president of the Permanent Observatory on Commons of the City of Naples. I would also kindly remind you that you can submit your questions anytime during the seminar, but please use the Q&A function. And thank you very much. I hope you will enjoy the seminar. I will now invite Professor Maria Geagea to introduce the lecture.
Thank you, Gianpel. First of all, thank you all for being here. And special thanks to Gianpel for having invited me 4 years back now to be part of this wonderful adventure, wonderful project that he put together, and to give me the opportunity to co-supervise Dona Geagea with him. And this was a very fruitful collaboration because Dona is a rigorous but also very committed researcher. And today she's going to give us a brief 20-minute presentation of key findings from her research, her PhD research. So what Dona is about to do today is examine this call to remunicipalize water resources that we saw across Europe and the rest of the world over the past 15 years, partly, but not exclusively, as a counteract to the privatization practices and under austerity frameworks. Dona's research focuses on two cities, Terrassa in Spain and Napoli in Italy, who claimed a process of remunicipalization, but pushed beyond that. They pushed for employing a commons-oriented logic in the management and ownership of water resources. So Dona explores in her PhD, and today she will tell us a bit about this interface between public and commons governance and ownership of water resources. How is it enacted in practice? What difficulties it encounters? What new openings for water management in the future it brings? How can you think beyond the municipalization paradigms and into a commons framework? So without further talk, I pass on to Dona. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me and see the slides. Fantastic. Thank you also, Jampel, and I'm really grateful to Maria Francesca and Lavinia for agreeing to be discussants on today's webinar. And I'm looking forward to the conversation that we will have also with those who are joining us today. Before I start my presentation, I would just like to take a moment to draw our attention to what is happening in Gaza right now. And I would like us to recognize this weaponization of water as a tool of war, and that it really points to the importance of knowing who controls water, because whoever controls water controls life. And I think this is the basic principle at the heart of water movement struggles the world over. And this is very linked to the context of my research on recommoning water. So having said this, and before getting into telling you the stories, today I intend to tell you two stories, one on Terrassa and one on Naples. I just want to lay the foundations first on some concepts to make sure we're all on the same page and you can follow along more easily as we talk about these. So in principle, probably many of you are familiar with the three first spheres that I have there: the private, the public, and the commons. The private and public are probably much more talked about. The commons, there's been a bit of maybe confusion around it, but the definition that I work with is really based on the seminal work of Elinor Ostrom and the long years of research conducted on looking at what commons means. And so that type of research frames the commons as common pool resources that are governed under common property regimes. What that means is common pool resources, for example, are highly subtractable. So if I use a portion of water, there will be less for you to use. And they are difficult to exclude because, for example, they are forests, rivers, fish stock. It's difficult to exclude people from using them. And so they're governed under common property regimes, meaning that they are under collective management and institutional setups that permit the sustainability of the resource itself so that it is not depleted and that everyone gets a share. So these three spheres have been posited as being separate. And also the commons have been presented by some scholars as an alternative to the public and the private. But we know very well that in the last decades, actually, the public and the private have been in very close collaborations. We know that there's been a lot of private encroachment on public affairs, so that more public affairs and public services are being managed and outsourced to private actors. And so in this trend of privatizing the public, a way to resist it has been that activist fronts have been looking at the other two spheres, the combination of the public and commons, as a way to resist privatization. I'll speak a bit more about this, but I just wanted to situate my research in where these two spheres of the public and commons overlap, in that space in between, that threshold, I talk about it in the research, where some have talked about it as commoning the public, others have talked about commons-public partnerships. In this research, we speak about it as recommoning. And of course, Maria had already mentioned the concept of remunicipalisation. So I'll just frame these two definitions. So remunicipalisation is the act of bringing water back to full public ownership and management. And there's been demands for this kind of public management to be more transparent and accountable and participatory. And recommoning pushes the boundaries a bit further because it's more about reclaiming the everyday practices of social organizing and reproducing water politics and management, so repoliticizing water in the city. It's about reclaiming water through imaginaries, discourses, and practices that challenge neoliberal frameworks around water governance. And more essentially, it's about permitting a form of power sharing that allow collective caring with citizens, not on behalf of citizens. And so from the interviews I conducted, it was really clarified to me that remunicipalisation was being used by activists as a first step to recover water as a common good, to disrupt to some extent the market logic, but that alone it was not enough. And so this is what led to the curiosity of looking at the two cases. Before going into the cases, just a quick stop on methodology so you have a sense of what led to these results. I've used two in-depth case studies, one on Terrassa and one on Naples. The data collection incorporates 49 in-depth semi-structured interviews. There were also follow-up interviews in Terrassa with follow-up conversations in Naples, and there was a focus group conducted in Terrassa. My analysis, and I'll speak to this a bit more in the later slides, uses a relational comparative urban studies. I'll frame this later, but also using thematic discourse and narrative analysis. And I've relied on some secondary materials and resources, like, for example, legal documents, looking at the financial statements of the municipalities, but also looking at documents and material provided by the different water movements on both ends. So now I'll tell you the story, because basically the choice of Terrassa and Naples is because they are considered as two deviant cases, and deviant in academic language, that actually means they're unique or unusual examples of successful remunicipalization that pushed public governance a bit beyond just remunicipalization towards a commons logic. But before I do that, just a bit of background to situate the context of these two cities. The financial crisis that happened in 2008 shook the world. Following that was the Eurozone crisis around 2010. The response to these crises was implementing austerity measures top-down. So particularly in the EU, it was mandated top-down, and austerity means cutting of public spending. One interviewee described it as putting the trickle-down effect at the municipal level is like putting the municipality in a straitjacket so that it cannot really operate or provide its public services the way that it is intended to. So this cutting of public spending resulted in an incentive that municipalities would outsource more of their public services so that they would incur less deficits. And by doing so, it increased the private actors' participation in delivering public services, including in the water sector. This led to, for example, in Spain, by the year 2015, there were more than 50% of the population that were being served by a private water operator. So we can see that this trend was sort of becoming more of a common sense at the time, which resulted in a growing resistance and dissent to this. And the water movements that grew in this period were actually very inspired and heavily influenced by movements in South America. Many of you might be familiar with the water wars in Cochabamba, Bolivia in the year of 2000. This is an emblematic case where a multinational corporation that took over the water service in the city started to increase tariffs. And people who couldn't afford to pay their tariff, they would have their water cut off. And so eventually people took to the streets. It got very violent, but they succeeded to kick out the multinational corporation from the country, from the city, not from the country. So this was an example for what could happen if private companies with a profit-driven incentive continued to operate the water services. And so this basically sets the stage where following that in the last 15 years, there were more than, and I'm just going to get my stats right, more than 267 cases of water remunicipalization documented in 37 countries, including across prominent European cities like Paris, Naples, Berlin, and Terrassa. So Terrassa and Naples specifically became what I speak of as points of light in this system, because they were examples of successful remunicipalization that were heavily driven bottom up, but that really shifted their water governance into what we talk about as a commons-oriented water governance model, a public model. So I'll start with Terrassa. Terrassa is a mid-sized city in the northeast of Spain. It's the third largest city in the province of Catalonia, and its population is just over 225,000. For those of you more familiar with Barcelona, it's a 40-minute drive north of Barcelona. Terrassa has had to adapt its water infrastructure to meet a growing textile production industry in the 19th century. So at the time, and we know that textile production is very water consumptive, they had to create a water company, and at the time it was a private water company established by the rich business owners of the city called Mina, and that was in 1842. It was set up in order to bring water to the city from other sources because the local sources were depleted. And so it looked at elsewhere, and elsewhere was the Llobregat River. And then this particular company managed the water service in Terrassa for 75 years, with the last concession coming to an end in 2016. And at the time, it could have been renewed. Because of the larger context of what was happening, the movements in Spain, the movements of the squares, the mortgage crisis, people taking to the street, opposing a lot of what was going on, the water movement was also growing in that context. And so the water movement in Terrassa began to also grow. They mobilized under the name of Taula del Agua, the water roundtable of Terrassa. And they protested, they lobbied political parties, and eventually they succeeded to establish remunicipalisation in the city. In fact, and I just want to point out that you can see, this is not the Taula del Agua, this is the Citizen Water Observatory of Terrassa. What actually they succeeded to do as activists before this entity was set up is they put a proposal together during the period that the city was starting to consider remunicipalizing. They put a proposal together because they said, we're not just a movement of protest, we're also a movement of proposals. They looked at other cities' examples, particularly the city of Paris, because it already had a citizen water observatory. They looked at other cities that remunicipalized, and they said, okay, how can we push the boundary a little further on what has already been achieved to create an entity, a civic body, that would be able to co-produce decisions about water in the city with the municipality and with the water utility. And so this was the key interesting aspect to the city of Terrassa, because there was a vision for creating something more. And as you can see in the photo, I'll just take a minute to point out, this is the Citizen Water Observatory during a focus group. Actually, it's not everyone, but you can already see that the majority are women. So women make up 60% of the Citizen Water Observatory, and it's all on volunteer basis. So they're really holding up the work being done. So if we ask the question, did this approach in Terrassa result in democratizing water governance? The answer is, to a large extent, yes. Because what happened here is they created many more channels of accountability. The new water utility that was set up is 100% public and not for profit. There was also the Citizen Water Observatory that was set up on the side as the civic deliberative body. They really wanted to be autonomous, but they are supported by the city council. And 2 members from the Citizen Water Observatory sit on the water utility board. And so they are involved in the legal decisions that are taken. They're involved legally, they are responsible legally on the decisions that are taken. And then the OAT itself, which is the Citizen Water Observatory, has members. It says here 36 in the chart that we have in a published paper, but since the paper was published, actually the number grew to 38, and it's divided into working groups. The working groups are basically set up based on priorities discussed with the municipality and with the water utility. And so this system, of course, it has had many challenges, and we wrote about it in the first paper that we published on Terrassa. But actually, it is still the best example we have to date of a civic body that is trying to co-produce decisions on water in the city in a way that's closely aligned with a notion of democracy as managing one's affairs themselves. And now we will shift to Naples. So Naples is a much larger city than Terrassa. It has a population of about 1 million inhabitants. It is the largest city in southern Italy and the third largest in Italy. And the context of Naples is actually falls into a broader, and maybe Maria Francesca will speak a bit more about this, but falls in a broader implementation of a privatization project since the 90s of reforming water services. And particularly in 2009, the Ronchi decree forced the municipal companies to compete under market competition. So they had already been set up as joint stock companies. They're public companies, but they're joint stock. What that means is they can be divided into shares, and their shares can be sold. And so there had been examples of multinational corporations becoming shareholders in these public companies. But, and I want to clarify that in Naples, the water utility at the time, Arin, was fully public, but it was a joint stock model. So it means that it could have shares that can be sold in the future to private actors, and it had a profit motive. In response to this national agenda, water movements rose in resistance, actually in Naples since 2003, 2004, but it culminated across the country in a very popular referendum that maybe some of you are familiar with, the referendum of 2011, asking people if water should remain public. And in brief, the answer was yes. Citizens linked the protection of water to broader democratic values, and particularly in Naples and in the case of Italy, they linked it directly to notions of commons by using discourse around water as commons. Since then, Naples has become the only large city to change its utility model, so to remunicipalize and change its utility model into 100% public and non-profit water utility. They even named it Acqua Bene Comune, which means water as a commons. So they put that even in the name of the utility. And again, if we ask about, is this a model, does it further democratize water governance locally? Well, yes, and again, it has more channels of accountability. However, the model in Naples did fall under scrutiny. We also talk about this in the paper on Naples. There were many challenges for the way that it was set up and how the process got further co-opted in a sense by the administration top down. So what happened is in the bylaws, the original bylaws of the water utility, there was an experimentation or a mechanism for public participation or civic participation, but it was through a surveillance committee of 21 members where only registered NGOs could participate. For example, the World Wildlife Fund or Mare Vivo. But the activists who were part of the water committees themselves could not join. And so this became the first point of tension. Eventually, they tried to tweak this model. There were moments where they opened up the board of directors so that activists from the water committee could join. It also didn't work out. It had some issues. So in the end, it's seen as there is a mechanism, but it's not fully functioning. And because of this co-optation top-down, the administrative understanding of participation is representation. And so it didn't leave room for a kind of commoning to happen. Now to my last two slides. So thank you already for your attention. I'm almost gonna let you go after these two slides, but just to bring these two cases together. Much literature already exists on each of the two cases, perhaps a lot more on Naples because it preceded Terrassa by several years. But this is the first time in this research actually that we're bringing the two cities together into dialogue through a relational comparative urban study. What it means is we're not doing a traditional comparison of two mutually exclusive cities, but we're comparing specific relations, processes, circulations, and connections that reproduce these cities, also in relation to one another. So it's conditions that are created to be, perhaps similar, but that could lead to different outcomes. And out of this, what we can observe from the two cases is that there are three main conditions. The first one was the austerity context that really imagined to the point that it actually was easier for municipalities to outsource their water services to private actors rather than have to otherwise prove the case if they wanted to maintain water services under a public management. So the system was designed to really make it easier to facilitate outsourcing rather than keeping services in-house. And the rise of resistance to austericide, an interviewee labeled it as austericide, similar to ecocide. So it's the almost like like killing the possibility of public utilities, or sorry, municipalities to really spend on the most essential public services like water. And then the other condition was that there was this recommoning imaginary in the actors of the movement, which was quite heterogeneous. So it wasn't consistent. Like the movement is really multitudes of actors that even clash in some ideas. But what was there, definitely through a discourse analysis that I did on the interviews conducted with activists from both sides, was that they were talking about water in Terrassa as a human right, in Naples as a fundamental right, that it belongs to the community or the inhabitants of the territory. There was this notion of a sense of stewardship or custodianship or collective care around water, and that it must be outside of market logics. And so this kind of recommoning imaginary is really what shaped the outcomes that we talked about. And the last one is the operationalization of the notion of commons, because what it took is legal hacking and experimenting, and to some extent some institutional bricolaging, to be able to create these different or alternative, I mean, you could even label it as innovative approaches to water governance locally. And finally, just some takeaways that can hopefully lead us into the discussion is that we really need to pay close attention to the values underlying the water movements by looking at their imaginaries, discourses, and practices, because this is where I believe the visions of an alternative live. This is where it exists. It's through these the values that they're holding and the imaginaries and discourses and practices that they use. Particularly, for example, if you look at movements, open assembly formats of discussing and deliberating, which we do not see so much happening when you have like a representative form of participation. The second one is that in both case studies, the public administrators were either the facilitators or the interceptors of the extent to which these water recommoning experiments were indeed transformative. And ultimately, really clarifying that there's no panacea to the complex challenge of managing and governing water, especially drinking water services at a city scale, but that a commons logic in these cases has offered a feasible alternative approach. And I think what remains finally to be seen is whether reaching this milestone will enshrine the necessity of the public as the interlocutor for the commons, or whether it will permit crossing further towards a full operationalization of the notion of commons by reimagining property relations and also social relations in more just and equitable ways in either these cities or in future ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dona, for a really comprehensive presentation and comparative of the two case studies. I would like to pass on to the first commentator, Lavinia Steinfort, and she will be followed by Maria Francesca De Tullio. And the aim is to see whether we can come with a synthesis of key issues, key questions, perhaps key ways forward. We will see. But there's a lot of common ground, I know, in your research. And we're really lucky to have both Lavinia and Maria Francesca here with us today. Thank you. So I'll pass on to Lavinia first. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Maria and Dona, for this excellent presentation. Is my audio okay? Just to check. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I think it's very interesting to hear the research by Donna, and I will give my reflections building on exactly that interface between public and commons, which was in one of those first slides. And I think it's really important in any strategy for social, economic, environmental transformation to really unpack what is possible, what is happening and has been happening for centuries or decades at least on that site. Because I think the point on the horizon, whether it's water or energy or any essential provisioning on which all our lives depend, it's about collective self-determination. In combining kind of economic democratization and social transformation. So I think these are always ideally coming together. And I think by combining these strategies, having a parallel outside-inside strategy, and I will go a bit deeper into that dimension of outside-inside, that we cannot allow for the state to remain captured as a tool of domination, as a tool of oppression, as a tool of colonization. So I think this parallel strategy to focus on building counterpower from below, which I think more aligns with the commoning side of things, to have strong social movements, strong independent trade unions, to combine that with an inside strategy to transform power, forcing to share it, to co-govern, which were many of the lessons that Donna also presented. So I think the push that we have been seeing actually across Catalonia, across Spain, and across other parts of Europe for winning electoral power is something we also have to I don't know, I think build on those cycles of social movements, which is known as municipalism. So to build citizen platforms, as has been happening in Barcelona, for example, and to challenge ourselves to really see what has been achieved. And I think Terrassa, as I'm a bit more familiar with Terrassa than with Naples, is I think extraordinary in terms of hacking the legal system, forcing an observatory to have structural decision-making powers. And of course, this is a constant struggle with the municipality, with the water workers, with the status quo, let's say, but to think also beyond the local and to not limit ourselves. And this is dangerous territory, let's say, because I'm very, very aware of the constant risk of co-optation, of the constant risk that under the name of the public, then oppressive policies and power practices will continue. So I think this is why we have been understanding and trying to push for a more expansive notion of public. And I think this is why also at CNI, we very
Lavinia,
much...
sorry to interrupt. Your audio is breaking a little bit, or is it me? I hear your audio a bit broken. Is it me? You're here, okay. Okay, sorry. Might be me.
No, thanks
Sorry.
for mentioning. I'll maybe also try to talk a bit slower. Maybe that helps. But to see which strategies have been effective to commoning the public and to maybe commoning the state, even though I know that sounds to probably some of you as an oxymoron, because I think kind of like remunicipalisation and with that public ownership is only as much public as it is democratic, right? And I think public is really much, it is really that very combination of powers for collective self-determination, because we have been working a lot as Transnational Institute on state-owned enterprises, and there's nothing inherently public about state-owned enterprises. It's really elected representatives needs to have constant pressures from organized labor, from organized communities, from organized users to be held accountable. And I think this is just very important to stress in order to see how strategies that have manifested in this water observatory needs to be learned from, and not as a panacea, but as a strategy that can deliver transformation and that can also be pushed for on higher levels, on regional levels, on national levels, because especially when it comes to water, which has a clear environmental dimension, and I think which has been bringing together across Latin America movements, environmental movements, water defenders on the countryside, with also water as a human right in the urban areas in Cochabamba. I think we see the synthesis of social movements happening where, as in Terrassa, it's very clear that this water work it's very feminized, it's very gendered, and how to bring these different movements together across the rural-urban spectrum, because also on that actual frontier around the world, we see reactionary politics exploiting this diversion. So how we as members of social movements, as activists, scholar activists, can really build bridges between these different dimensions, and where movements have been doing that work actually on the ground. And so as T&I, we have been trying to see remunicipalisation as a stepping stone for deepened democratization of the economy, and as a precondition. And I think the public community, public commons partnerships are very powerful in that regard, because it provides us with the next steps that needs to be taken in whatever shape. And I think there is also, in terms of the global political economy, many lessons to take from Latin America, especially from Costa Rica, for example, where we see kind of this much more territorial dimension of social transformation. So in Costa Rica, we actually see the most transformative democratic enterprises on a national level happening. And just to point that out, that it is possible, and it has been working for decades, this type of higher level transformation, which is an ongoing struggle. It's never a utopia, if we understand that as an end result, but something that is ongoing. And I just want to give this one example of Banco Popular, which is the biggest democratic bank in the world, I would say. So 1.2 million owners it has, because everyone in Costa Rica that has 1 year, that has its savings at this bank for 1 year, it becomes a co-owner of it. And this is represented in an assembly, in a workers' assembly, which is the highest governing body of the bank. And I think around 290 representatives sit there. So this has the mandate to really look after and advance the social welfare of the Costa Rican people. So it has this original development mandate, and its profits are for a substantial extent reinvested in people that otherwise wouldn't be able to get loans. Now, just to give you a few dimensions of how beneficial this democratic governance is. And not only that, I think when it comes to Banco Popular and also the energy system, which I think really is why, in terms of fighting the climate crisis, we have to think how transformation can and must take place on higher scales, on higher levels, is that the so-called state-owned enterprises, national enterprises of Costa Rica, are much more hybrid in shape. They work together, not by competing with other companies, as is happening in many other countries in the world, in a market, in an artificial market, but actually collaborating with cooperatives, with municipal local enterprises to provide universal provisioning. And I think that this is very, on the one hand, unique, but on the one hand, also not something that is limited to Costa Rica. In Kerala, Southwest India, we know of similar public community partnerships that have been working since post-World War. And I won't dive into more details now, but I think it's very promising that it's not only that another world is possible, but it is happening, and it has been happening for so many decades. And there are these incredible lessons to learn from, and to see which proposals we can actually build social majorities around for change from the outside and the inside, let's say. So let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Lavinia, for broadening out the discussion already to taking it into a more international, more programmatic agendas. And we'll come back to that in the broader discussion in the end, I'm sure. And I would like to pass the discussion floor up to Maria Francesca De Tullio for her comments and intervention. Thank you, Maria Francesca.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me and sharing my presentation. So please let me know if there is any problems or issues with this. Yeah, I've met Dona basically on the field in Napoli. In a way, we also been doing this research together, and I also take the opportunity to express my gratitude to Professor Geagea and Professor Dell'Angelo for the contribution of the lab to our shared work. So what I would like to do is also to give some more framework, so in that sense to go a little bit more local maybe, that I think can give especially visibilize the value of Dona's research in Napoli. This is a little bit of background of what happened in Italy, but not just in Italy, but especially in the southern Italy, which is the most disadvantaged part of Italy. So what happened is that since 2000, there were a lot of reforms that went in the direction not only of austerity, but also going against the redistribution of economic resources, which is the first one. So the local financial autonomy was also an opportunity to somehow eliminate some forms of redistributions. And afterwards, after the crisis, of course, there was a new wave of austerity that also gave place to so-called public property federalism, so which is mainly a privatization wave of public property. And after the fiscal compact in 2012, there was even the constitutionalization of budget balance. So somehow whatever institution that were cutting public expenses for budget reasons was somehow legitimized to do that. And oppositely, they had to justify each time they were recurring to public debt in order to finance their expenses. Just a final note on how it's going now. Basically, the Next Generation EU has been seen as something that has somehow inverted that route. But actually, the way I see it, this is just a parenthesis and a very circumscribed one. While the financial stability establishment has stayed there, as the EU itself declared, and especially the so-called conditionalities. Here you see highlighted the law of 2021 that is granting some funding to cities that have budget difficulties, but at the same time, they ask these cities to adopt some measures that are the typical austerity measures, which means privatization, rationalization of public expenses, etc. I'm making this premise because, of course, I think commons are in a way a response to this situation, and also a response in defense of fundamental rights, as Dona was saying. More specifically in Napoli, and of course, after the learnings from Greece, from Ecuador, from other states that have committed to an audit of their public debt. We also had a Council of Audit on Public Debt in Napoli that tried to highlight how a part of the debt, of public debt, is illegitimate or illegal or odious, which very shortly means sometimes it's just legally illegitimate and sometimes it's just politically illegitimate, so against the collective interest. So actually what the council discovered is that there were multiple illegitimate debts coming from basically unfair credits from extraordinary emergency commissioners that are state entities that operate at local level, but also by credits that are not enforced, especially with private contractors using public spaces. In this context, it was an explicit choice on my side to just to help framing this path of recommoning institutions or creative use of law or legal hacking, to use only literature from Napoli, just to help giving a first-person interpretation of what happened. Rossi, Pinto, and Recano identify this kind of politics as a politics of interstices. So the ability of activists to enter institutional space, but also to keep in a conflict stance. So to still seek their political and social legitimization in grassroots movements and in grassroots consensus, but still being able to have dialogues and sometimes even entering institutional places. Another notion that has been used is a hegemony of non-hegemony, which is probably one of the reasons why this experience could happen in Napoli. Somehow social movements and especially commoning movements made this effort to preserve heterogeneousness of various political positions, of course, with very clear anti-austerity, anti-fascist, anti-sexist, and anti-racist premises. And this was based a lot on self-reflexivity, which also, of course, helped to, in a way, adopting an institutional mindset and questioning institutions themselves. Last, commons have been interpreted as a care-based ways of living after the notion of cuerpo territorio, which links the body and the territory. And somehow the defense of commons materializes new forms of living based on care, defense, healing, and reinforcement. So this is to frame in a theoretical sense what happened, which is, it was then transferred in legal forms, which is rather my background. So first thing to say is, of course, that it was not by hazard that all this movement, in a way, this commoning movement in Napoli and in Italy started from water. In the specific case of Napoli, I would also say it's starting from a waste crisis. I don't know how known it is outside of Italy, but we basically had a big crisis with waste management, urban waste management, but also special waste management with agreements, let's say, between entrepreneurs and mafia to hide illegally special waste, and also very grassroots movements to vindicate, to advocate for self-determination and, of course, against pollution of territories. So the legal hacking in this case would, of course, somehow be based on what the Italian constitution says, and especially, of course, about fundamental rights and solidarity, but also on formal and substantial equality. In the Italian legal doctrine, substantial equality means a recognition of the fact that even if in theory we are all equal in front of the law, we are not in fact equal. So there are some conditions of fact that are somehow impairing equality. And then the regulations on property, of self-management of public services, and democratic participation. So based on that, there was a very clear connection between commons and fundamental rights, that was made, first of all, by Rodota Commission, who wanted to adapt somehow the civil code to constitution. Constitution says property has to have a social function, while the civil code still uses a very traditional form of concept of property, which is the absolute one, let's say. So also the right to use and abuse and take and exploit property. And that became, of course, more popular with the movement for water as commons that not only led to the recommoning or the municipalisation of water, but also to the growth of emerging commons, which really makes this distinction between commons that are necessarily commons because they serve fundamental rights like water, and emerging commons that are commons because people see them and perceive them as commons, and then they advocate or liberate these commons directly. And is also brought to recognize activists as consultants with these two organs, the Audit Council of Public Debt and the Observatory of Commons. So in my view, and here is my conclusion, I think overlapping somehow Dona's discourse on water and also Lavinia's remarks on genderized value of water, etc. I think especially this topic, so much connected to fundamental rights and to gender issue, highlights how micro politics somehow, so even how internal dynamics of power within social movements and within political movements can have a role in participatory democracy and ultimately in how institutions are built. So in that sense, a questions that we can probably address together is how organization can be less hierarchical, less patriarchal in order to become institutions, to produce institutions that can value marginalized voices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria Francesca. And I find maybe you can stop sharing your screen. Thank you. I find this movement we just experienced from the local to the international, from the specific to the universal, to be at the heart of what we collectively are trying to achieve with our research and to say and to achieve politically, not only academically. And also I find this interface dialectic, if you wish, between the specific and the universal to be at the heart of your presentations, but also to be at the heart of what is common between the two cases that Dona presented and also the cases that Lavinia mentioned. And I think this is very important. So that, I want to just highlight a few similarities, commonalities that it maybe can pave the way for thinking of further ways forward. So that's one, the local, specific and universal interface. Another one is that the link of these water-specific struggles to much broader socioeconomic struggles against patriarchy, against austerity measures. Recently, we published a work where we depict austerity as an environmentally dangerous idea, not just socioeconomically dangerous. So these actors, these communities, these groups engage with those broader issues. In fact, that not only engage, and that's the third commonality, is these movements emerge out of this necessity that these broader socioeconomic deprivation creates. And a fourth commonality, of course, is, you all mentioned it, that these are groups of movements that don't just stop to protesting. There's millions of protests. Protests don't do anything. You know, they move beyond protesting and into thinking differently and acting differently, establishing new imaginaries for doing water governance and management differently. And fifth, they don't just stop at imaginaries. They try to enact these imaginaries and institute those imaginaries to change legal frameworks. And they also highlight the complexity of doing this. Also, we didn't touch too much upon that, but in all cases, the cases that I know and others that I have researched in the past, these complexities lead to massive internal debates, fights, and contradictions within those movements that are very difficult to navigate. So they don't only have to fight the external enemy, as it were, but internally there's all these deliberations and fights that, unfortunately, many movements collapse under the weight of these internal conflicts. And finally, to me, and I'm just I want to launch to try with you a way of perhaps thinking of a much broader commonality, is that beyond the debate over public or commons, and obviously the debate between private and public, but even beyond the debate of public and commons, maybe here at the heart of all this is a debate or understanding of what a democratic process means, what democratic politics is, and democratic and democratizing the politics of water, of energy, of any other common resource is about citizens stopping being consumers, and that we've been all trained into becoming consumers under neoliberal capitalism, and becoming citizens again. And becoming citizen means a lawmaker, in effect. A democratic process has never been a consensual building process. Democracy is an agonistic process, and where the space and place of power remains open. Nobody or someone holds it for a very brief moment, and the space of power moves around. And this juggling of power and sharing of power from hand to hand has to keep going in order for this to be kept a democratic process. So that's transpired from all the things you talked about, and the case is that even when things are institutionalized in a way that moves forward towards a commoning framework, the cooptation fear is around the corner. It's very quick to happen. So this agonistic process that we call democracy needs to be enacted on a permanent basis. And this means this takes enormous energy and time and labor, in effect, from those who participate. And this is also another key question. How do we maintain these democratic processes under a broader socioeconomic configuration that doesn't allow the time, let alone fund the time, for citizens to become part of these democratic processes? So, okay, I'll open the question for you to comment and perhaps respond. So within these imaginaries and huge achievements that we are experiencing in praxis on the ground across the world, but at the same time we experience this fatigue, this continuous input of labor, this continuous efforts of cooptation. How do we move onwards towards turning these localized radical imaginaries into universal paradigms, into universal ways of thinking and acting, into making these things possible at a higher level, as Lavinia mentioned? What kind of methods, what kind of common practices can we think of as researchers to become facilitators, as activists to participate towards universalizing these wonderful examples you all talked about, and also making them not be lost in time, not be co-opted with time. Please, you can just unmute yourselves and respond. If there are more than one responders at the time, we can raise your hands, but I think for the time being, just unmute yourselves and respond.
I feel tempted to just to call on Maria Francesca, put you on the hot seat, but just because of your embodied experience in the Commons movement in Naples, what in your case has been the urban Commons movement in particular, what has been your experience of linking that, the strategies that Maria just talked about and linking it to something more that others can participate in. You're an activist academic as well. And then I'm happy also for Lavinia and I to comment after.
Yeah.
Can I just, sorry to interrupt, can I just add, because it's very relevant, a question that came from Stella Arjondaki, and she says they very often when social movements or the commons grow, there is a debate and danger of co-optation from either market or national governments. Could you share your thoughts on this, considering also the cases for those two places and the context you have talked about? So maybe you can also comment on these. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, they're both very difficult questions. I start from the first one. Usually when you are somehow on the field and bringing some practices on tables, on working tables, on congresses, etc., people ask how this could be replicated or scaled up, etc. Usually, of course, the idea is not really to scale up. So in that sense, the way I see how we are somehow linking the local to broader issues. It's not about scaling up or expanding or replicating the same issues and models everywhere. Rather, what we have been doing in Napoli, especially in the context of urban commons, is somehow to transfer a methodology, which is basically allowing people to appropriate and to use creatively legal tools, political tools, relationships with institutions. So in that sense, we conceive commoning as a real, even if very small, laboratory of democracy, not because we think that everything can be managed just as a building or the water service, etc., but because we think that sharing a resource together also allows you to question the basic questions of democracy. And here, I think this really resonates with what Maria Geagea was saying about the internal conflicts, the existence of internal barriers within even the most democratic political organizations, and how difficult it is to raise these issues from within, which can be perceived as an attack. And this is why we created this collective called feministization of politics, to build together spaces between municipalist organizations, so with municipalist allies, to discuss those matters without being seen as the internal enemy somehow. So I think it's all about training somehow our reflexivity. This is how I think we build democracy, and this is how I think from my legal point of view, this is what democracy can learn from such small experiences as commons. And concerning co-optations, of course, I have no answer, meaning that, of course, that's always an issue. Massimo De Angelis calls it a commons fix. Commons can be used from the public sector to delegate social duties, or from the market sectors to avoid conflict. And here I really think what is important is to keep questioning. That's, again, self-reflexivity. I think it's a key factor of commoning and of avoiding, of being in somehow gray areas with institutions or with market solidarity economies, etc. So keep questioning. And also, of course, what we did more specifically with the institution was to explicitly fight, so to keep a conflictual stance somehow, because we want institutions not to delegate us some tasks as commoners, but to really be responsible for social rights and fundamental rights. So this is why we are always asking for more, in a way, which is somehow more dialogue and more, corruption somehow with institutional logics. But also it means for us to always advocate for the institutions to fulfill their duty. So in a way, we try to just to go ahead to build some examples of how things can be done, how democratic processes can be done. But our purpose eventually is to not really disappear, but of course not having to take care of public tasks. But yeah, of course, just a beginning of an answer, not really an answer again.
Thank you very much, Maria and Francesca, for this very in-depth answer. Would someone else want to respond to the question by Stella Kondaki?
Perhaps I'll just jump in quickly also to say that indeed there have been, and this is always a danger, and Maria Francesca touched on it, but specific to the two cases, Terrassa and Naples. So Maria Francesca spoke a bit on Naples. And in my presentation, you know, in terms of this whole participatory process, becoming sort of being translated into just representation, and you have to select someone who will speak on your behalf. And so not everyone can participate, but only the representatives, which is what the activists in the movement were challenging because of this other format of like the open assembly approach, which is very time consuming. And it does go against logics of efficiency, you know? So it's like, yeah, it will take time, but what it means, it's also a collective learning process. We're all educating each other. Actually, what I learned doing the research with Maria Francesca is that there was a process of even collectively bottom-up creating a law proposal in Italy. And so it is possible to do that in a collective manner that isn't just having a spokesperson who will speak on your behalf. And this is also another place where tension exists, because that person who represents, if we start to look at it from a feminist lens, in the paper on Naples, we were talking about how it was mostly men who are represented or represent particular institutes, academic, or, you know, they're lawyers, or they're in the government, but it was the men who were really taking that role of representing the movement, which was no longer coherent. So in a sense that happened there, but in Terrassa, what's been going on is that the municipalities started to catch on to the fact that they can, in a way, use the Citizen Water Observatory for legitimizing their decisions. So they're like, already we have the civic body, and they're the ones informing and making, you know, like revising the proposals we put forward. We're collaborating with them. So whatever decisions we make are already considered democratic and, you know, pass the check that everyone agrees to them. And so this is something that the members of the OAT, the Citizen Water Observatory, are aware of. And like, you know, Maria was saying, this sense of reflexivity and constant questioning, they're aware that this is happening. And so they're trying to navigate between not being used in such a way, still having the space to question and challenge and have counter proposals, and still be a space that is open to other residents in the territory who aren't necessarily citizens or aren't, you know, formally registered, but live and inhabit the city. So there's also been looking at it in that sense. Do I have an answer? No, but it's just like this idea of constantly trying to question and being alert for where co-optation is kicking in.
Thank you very much, Donna. We have another question, but Lavina, would you like to comment on
Yeah, sure. Let me try to be brief.
We have time, so no, we have time, so yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really good to unpack how can we avoid co-optation, because even though I think like we have to celebrate the wins, the preliminary wins as part of ongoing struggles. When something is remunicipalized or reclaimed, actually only then the struggle begins, right? Because then we have to hold those accountable. And it gets harder and harder because, yeah, with the example, the observatory can be used to say like, okay, we've done our share. This is enough of democratization. And I think, yeah, I'm speaking from the Netherlands, and a fascist far-right government is taking shape as we speak. And I'm just coming across all kinds of challenges, also on the municipal level, actually, that have had decades of neoliberal indoctrination, where civil servants are actually just, like constantly pushing back against legal hacks, because it's like, oh, but, like multi-stakeholders must always include businesses. They must, right? So they to break open this mindset, let's say, and to remind governments, public institutions, civil servants, why they exist, right? And that they should work for us, right? They should work for all residents, whatever legal status, beyond citizenship, right? So I think they might have been hollowed out, but transparency and to really translate the knowledge, everything around decision making, so that people can actually participate. What are the conditions for participation? I think really should be unpacked from there on, in order to have effective accountability mechanisms. And I think also we shouldn't underestimate the potential of democratic innovation, of like structural participatory decision making. I think innovation has been captured, but actually we should innovate, right? How we are dealing with each other, how we make decisions on whatever level. And for example, when it comes to state-owned enterprises on whatever level, I think putting back that like social mission and mandate, and how to make that operationalize it, how to build a new culture is something that we have been seeing in different countries, and what is so important to demarketize, to decorporatize these quote unquote public or state-owned institutions. And I think what I take a lot of inspiration from, just to end on that note, is it's similar. I think it has some similarities with Italy, where since 2016 they have been building a people's water law in Colombia, because in Colombia there are hundreds, if not more, community water aqueducts. So, like the pipes to provide local water for peri-urban rural communities mostly. And these are under attack, have been under attack by multinationals, but also this law is then to say like, okay, how can legislation actually make sure that the national government, with the Petro administration, there is an actual opportunity to defend those community water aqueducts. And it's not that these have been isolated. There actually has been for I think some decades a federated structure where these community water systems are actually having a national federal body where they're learning from each other and supporting each other. And I think this kind of federalism, I think, holds some pointers for us in the field of commoning, in the field of democratic public ownership, to see how how across an entire territory we can have that assembly-like democratic economy. And for example, as I'm always trying to see what is happening in the water justice struggles to learn from for the energy and climate struggles, we are now looking into energy federalism in Myanmar, where they're also in the midst of dictatorship, of ethnic conflict, are trying also to build those alternatives across a very big territory that is self-managed. and to think about energy and climate alternatives, which of course have a very big water dimension. So I just wanted to end on that inspiration I've been taking from allies.
Thank you very much, Lavinia. Maybe you can put the reference in the chat, and people can look more in depth. Thank you for this very interesting opening up the discussion broader into the energy and water federalism issues. Yeah, to close this question and discussion, yeah, I agree, and I think a move away from what we all learned as democracy, that is consensual politics, is very important. And that takes almost intergenerational fights and educational practices to move towards a agonistic democracy, where even when new practices are institutionalized, that's not the end of it, because there's an inherent contradiction for all the movements who we're doing something radical. That's why most movements don't want to institutionalize, and they're right not to want to, because they know the moment it's institutionalized, it becomes less radical. But that's because of the way we think about institutions and the way we set up institutions to work in this fixed framework with fixed delegates and actors and consensual politics. It doesn't have to be like that. And that is something we need to change our mindset over, what an institution is and how it should work. And I think all the cases you mentioned show very clearly that this can be done differently. And we need to, practice into doing it differently. Okay, we have another very interesting question. It's a more theoretical question. I don't know if, we have two. And I don't know if Jean-Paul would like to jump in on that. So one question by Catherine Baron is, why do you refer to Ostrom as the main theoretical framework? Is Ostrom's conception of the state relevant with your approach? Which is much more relevant. I'm not sure I understand this very well, but Catherine, you can clarify. So the question is, why do you refer to Ostrom as the main theoretical framework? And is her conception of the state relevant with your approach? And the other one by Prathiwi Patri is, what would be a possible institution at the global level? Is People's Water Forum as the alternative to the World Water Forum, financed by the World Water Council, an option? Is People's Water Forum as an alternative to the World Water Forum an option? I'm speaking from an Indonesian context. In there, a Recommoning laboratory is not possible. The conditions of impossibility include an authoritarian state with a militaristic and parliamentaristic approach. I would like to endorse Lavinia's just now that the state institutions have to work for the community. And we have one more question, so maybe we can answer these two and get to the final question that we have for today. Whoever would like to start, please go ahead.
I could just jump in to address the theoretical question.
Yeah, it's addressed to you in particular.
My research, and then I'm really happy that we can transition to the next one, and probably Lavinia has more to add, because that would be a nice way also to end on. In terms of using Ostrom as, so actually what I do is I build on Ostrom's definition of commons as a foundation, but this research really focuses on the notion of commoning, put forward initially by Linnebo, but also then further advanced by many other critical commons scholars. So really, I base my research on more of a critical commons lens that broadens the scope of what commoning permits beyond this restriction to a kind of limited to a particular boundary, because that's also a big part of it, is that you have a boundary of a context with a particular community and the institutions that are created in order to directly manage a biophysical resource. So we go from there to other authors who have talked about the notion of common and not commons as a political concept. There's the work of Hart and Negri, there's the work of De Angelis, there's the work, I'm just trying to remember, Laval and Dardot, there's, and then of course, there's the work of Federici. And so you start to go, depending on which angle you want to go, but the work that I've really, relied on has been more of broadening out beyond just the commons to the notion of commoning and how this has enabled alternative forms of experimenting within public institutions, within a public context. Especially, and I'll just use this question as an opportunity to really emphasize how much of a struggle it was, even from like an academic lens as a researcher. I've grappled so much with the idea of how do you really enable deeper forms of commoning on water governance in a city, like in a very complex urban context where you have complicated sets of infrastructure, technologies, and then you have, different actors and players making decisions and involved in the delivery of what has been framed as a service. And so in that, how do you enable a direct governance or direct management format? And so this is where I think, and Maria Francesca alluded to the work of Micciarelli, who really was distinguishing between emergent commons and necessary commons. And he speaks of water as a necessary commons. Therefore, it is better suited to remain within a public management model with deeper, more complex, let's say, participatory mechanisms versus emerging commons, which it is possible to actually autonomously and directly manage them. So I hope this answers your question, and I will leave it here to leave some time for others.
Yeah, just to say that Catherine Baron came back saying that the approach you presented is actually more nuanced, if I understand correctly, and more relevant to Ostrom's case, and it's worth being conceptualized further. I think in the paper you actually go that direction, but yeah, so it's a pertinent comment. Thank you, Catherine. Jean-Paul, you want to add something?
Yeah, perhaps just to add a minor thought. Let's say invoking Ostrom. I think something that is also interesting, independently from how relevant her work is in terms of the conceptualization of Dona's work. Something that I think is an interesting bridge, especially with what you were mentioning, Maria, this idea of building and rethinking new imaginaries and bringing them to somehow a universal level in times in which we have been brainwashed in thinking of ourselves as consumers. I think an equally important aspect of this rebuilding new imaginaries is actually debunking narratives and dominant narratives. And I think that's something that really we can recognize to the work of Lynn. And of course, there have been many scholars that pushed her thinking in a perhaps much more radical way. But something that should be recognized, and I think that we are also building on, is the fact that she did debunk some long-established narratives about the role of the state, the role of privatization. And so bringing the focus on the transformational capacity that communities have. So in that sense, I think that this is extremely relevant. If you think about the water governance crisis that London is experiencing these days, there was a recent article mainly describing the entire London metropolitan area as open-air sewage. And that is a completely privatized system. So something that, for example, Elinor Ostrom showed is that also from just a specifically technical hydrological point of view, for example, common governance systems, they do work much more effectively than private system or than largely operated state-led systems. So I think that this kind of diagnostic and debunking approach, a very strongly analytical approach, is very useful, and it is something that I see coming up in Dona's work, which then, of course, she brings it towards another level of reimagination by combining more radical thinkers. But I particularly appreciated let's say the analytical foundations that we can draw from Ostrom's work.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe because we don't have that much time, I would like to repeat the question by Prathivi Putri and plus one more question, and then open the floor to Lavinia and Maria Francesca to comment on this. So Prathivi Putri asks, would a possible institution at the global level is People's Water Forum as an alternative to the World Water Forum, an option. And then Evan Dennis asks, it would be great to hear some thoughts about what differentiated the successful Naples and the Catalonian examples compared to efforts in other Italian or Spanish cities under identical national constitutions that were not successful. So let's have a final round, because we are getting to a close at 12:30, right? Maybe we can take 5 more minutes. Maybe I can invite first Lavinia and Maria Francesca to comment on these questions if they wish.
Sure.
Lavinia, yeah.
Praviti, I think this is a very interesting suggestion, to think of the People's Water Forum as really the alternative for the World Water Forum. I can only endorse such a bold way of thinking of our own kind of social movements, platforms, and creations to take over this type of corporate authoritarianism that I think World Water Forum presents with our allies, our comrades in Bali a few days ago. I think it was just last week, being surrounded by paramilitary and thugs as they try to crack down on the People's Water Forum that was happening. So I guess the only kind of thought that came to mind with this question is that in Santiago, we did the Future is Public conference about 2 years ago in Santiago, Chile. And I think what was very striking is how reclaiming public services, reclaiming the public was actually coming from this dimension where people are suffering from such heavy repression, where political and economic powers are merging. And I think Pinochet's dictatorship in the 70s already, showed the real face of neoliberalism, bringing those together. So I think the fact that around the world movements are standing up for water as a human right and all these other dimensions of life is very promising to take collective charge of our future. So I was just really learning a lot from this conception of reclaiming the public from really a much more communal point of view in order to transform state governance as well. So let me just end there. I'm happy to hear more from Maria Francesca and Dona, and thank you so much for organizing this and also for your lovely moderation, Maria.
Thank you very much, Lavinia. Thank you. And Maria Francesca, would you like to?
Yeah, just very quickly. Of course, what you mentioned about authoritarian government, I think it's very important to, as a dialectic with the risks of cooptation, because of course there are risks of cooptation, but what I used to do is to mention that if we don't address, if we don't tackle institutions, so the need for democratic institutions, we are only working for the privileged one. So this is why I also endorse what Lavinia was saying about really the need to renovate and to change institutions themselves. So this is why, of course, I would be totally in favor of also strengthening international law in, of course, to tackle international dynamics of exploitation of water and other resources. And concerning Naples anomalies, this is really a frequently asked questions, and I don't have really one answer, but I think it's a synergy of factors. So first of all, somehow Napoli and the south of Italy is a territory where both the capitals are really not that physically present, meaning that there have been different forms of exploitation, and on the other hand, there's less state repression somehow for the same reason. The state is quite absent. This is what has allowed over time presence of a lot of occupied spaces, for example, which in Italy we call social centers, that also are open towards the territory's need, etc. But I would also like to highlight that, what I mentioned before, so the existence of environmental struggles such as the pollution of the Bagnoli area or post-industrial damages to the environment, the waste crisis, etc. And also the international networks, like it was the 2012 when the Magistris, the mayor that remunicipalized water, was elected. And it was really a period where in Europe you were feeling the need for a new democracy, so, such as, for example, the Indignados in Spain, the Occupy movement, etc. So I can just say it's probably multiple factors, but I don't have one final answer to that.
Thank you, Maria Francesca. It is case specific, definitely. I'll pass on to Dona if you want to make some final remarks before I pass on to Caterina and Jean-Bel again to close this webinar.
Maybe I'll keep it very brief and leaving on this note that with Pratiwi's comment and question about People's Water Forum, I think it's important to indeed try as many different approaches as we can, because all the folks I've interviewed have really indicated that this has all been a process of experimenting. And so we're trying to experiment with how we can change these institutions and how we can find ways that shift the power dynamics. So ultimately, it's about really encouraging as many alternative ways that we can try out and see how far we can get with them. And every time we reach a milestone, it allows to set a precedent that then perhaps allows us to not only push it further within that context, but inspire other places to find their own way of doing it, not just to replicate it, but to see what makes sense for them locally. So I'll leave it on this note, recognizing we didn't touch too much on matters of property relations and things like that related to what further complicates implementing, this commoning and commons approach to public water services and water in particular. But this can be left for another time. Thank you so much, and I'm really grateful to all of you, to you, Maria, for the moderation, and Maria Francesca and Lavinia for the discussion, and also Jean-Bel for being part of all this research, of course.
And many thanks to Caterina and Ariadna for the organizational part. And I'll pass on to Jean-Bel to close. And thank you for having me here. I found it really inspiring. And actually, there is something there definitely worth fighting and continue fighting for.
Thanks a lot, Donna. Thanks a lot, Maria Francesca, and Lavinia. So I'll pass it to Caterina for the closing remarks. She has some communication for our next seminars.
Thanks a lot. Jean-Bel, can you hear me? Now it works. Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, I first want to say and echo the words of Donna and Maria, and thank you all. It was definitely very inspiring, and I'm sure we all leave the session inspired for further reflection. And yes, I'd like to spend the last second just to invite you to the next seminar. So the next one will be on June 19th, so in exactly 2 weeks. This time's in the afternoon, so we start at 2 p.m. in Central European summertime. And we will welcome Paula Zuluaga Guerra, working on decolonizing by making a co-research process. She actually sent an open invitation for people to join her on this debate. So it will be rather a space where people can share experiences on decolonization around research practices. As you know, we have a long list of seminars until the end of the year, so I can invite you all to consult that in our website. And also nice news, the recording of the first sessions are now available on our YouTube channel. So if you're interested to rewatch them or you missed anything, please don't hesitate to go and watch them. I want to give a final thanks to all our partners and the host institutions of NEWAVE. And finally, to all of you who have attended today's seminars. And just a reminder that you can keep following our activities on our social media. So thank you, everybody, for being here today, and to all our speakers. And hope to see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.